Price. Okay, so I'm one of those guys who, when I hear that there's something nearby that is supposedly haunted, I immediately go and check it out. And I did most of this in South Texas, where I grew up, where there's a really, really rich Latin tradition of folk stories and hauntings in the area. I've been doing this now for 40 years, and nothing ever really appeared or happened. But what I'm about to tell you is an absolutely true story. In 2007, I was invited to Ohio University in Athens, Ohio, to speak at this thing called the Aesthetics Technologies Lab on the graphic novel, graphics and culture. And I landed in Columbus, Ohio, and my handler came to pick me up, and a couple of friends as well. I brought some artists, some editors, so they could get the whole deal. And I immediately started asking my handler about the notorious hauntings of Athens, Ohio. So Athens is considered one of the most haunted cities in America. So this was really interesting for me. And what she told me about was the Ridges. I don't know if any of you know what the Ridges is. In 1871, there was a structure built in Athens, Ohio on a cliff that overlooks this quaint and very spooky town. And it was an asylum for the criminally insane. There are 5 cemeteries that surround the Ridges. There are no names on the grave sites. There are just patient numbers. There's a tree in the back that was the hanging tree, and the thickest branch still shows the groove from where the criminally insane were hung by court order. There are shackles in the basement. And in fact, near one of the shackles, someone has carved many, many, many years ago, "I was never crazy." This is the dark pit of the early days of psychiatry. This is the worst. In fact, it is reported, though never proven, that water therapy, electroshock therapy, and even lobotomy was born in this institution. This is a really, really interesting, dark place. But the most interesting thing is the stain. In 1971, a 53-year-old patient. By now, by the way, the institution has been privatized. It had become a place where wealthy people dropped family members off they no longer wanted, who were problematic. And then even beyond that, 10 years later, by 1971, it was a place where homeless people were being corralled. It was just an empty, dark institution, and only half of it was functioning. And a 53-year-old patient by the name of Margaret Schilling managed to get away from her group, wander off into the closed-up high areas of the institution, go through several self-locking doors, find a room named N20, a ward that was the infectious disease ward, tuberculosis to be precise, that had been shut down for over 60 years. There was only one door. The door locked behind her, and she died of exposure there. What we find out is that she proceeded to take off all of her clothes in her madness. This is December 1st, by the way, so she froze to death. She took off all of her clothes, she folded them neatly beside her, she laid down perfectly, like this, with her hands over her heart, and she passed. 41 days later, maintenance finds her. We have no idea if she tried to scream or tried to escape. We don't even know if this institution, so badly run at this point, knew she was missing. A general maintenance suite finds her 41 days later, and what they find is essentially a puddle of a human being. There is this beautiful arching window in this room, the most impressive window in the entire structure, and the top of it is stained glass. It's like a church window. At night she froze. On the daytime, the light came in and thawed her, magnified through the stained glass. And at night she froze, and in the day she thawed, and at night she froze, and in the day she thawed. And this happened for 41 days, until the fat in her arms and in her shoulders and in her legs began to liquefy, and the acid began to seep into the concrete beneath her. And when they found her, they had to use shovels to pick her up. When they picked her up, what they found was a perfectly etched stain of her body, lying in the very center of the room, with her clothes neatly folded next to it. So when my handler told me this story, I thought, awesome. This is awesome. I want to see the stain. And the whole time I was there doing my talks and all this jazz, I kept asking students about the stain. Most of them had never heard of it. The few that had never seen it. I began to feel like this was bullshit. The last night, I got my friends together that we'd gone there with, and I said, I'm totally going to the Ridges. Now, here's what makes it easy to access the Ridges. In 1993, Ohio University purchased the institution in an effort to save it. They were going to turn it into condos. I love America. And so the institution purchased it, and they took the bottom floor and they made them into art studios for graduate students, which makes complete sense. So we go there, and it's all true, man. I see the cemeteries, I see the hanging tree. This place is a rising, beautiful Gothic structure on a cliff that overlooks this town. It's extraordinary. And we go in, and there's one student working late. And after I sort of badger her, it turns out that she reportedly has seen the stain. She knows where it is. A couple of years ago, they went up with some friends. I beg her to take us. She agrees. Here's what's really interesting. We get to the stairwell that leads up into the closed-off part of the institution, and she grabs a bag that the students have hidden back in the stairwell, filled with wooden wedges, because we're about to pass through the series of self-locking doors. So we have to wedge each door behind us. If they close, we'll be locked in. At the top of this stairwell, there's no electricity beyond this point. This is the completely unkept asylum for the criminally insane that we're going up into. The minute we pass away from the electricity point, it's pitch black. And I can tell the ceilings are high because the way our footsteps sound in this kind of vaulted, dark room. And there's so much dust and what is probably asbestos over the years from them building that we have to wear our shirts over our face. It doesn't help, but it seems like it does, I guess. And somebody has a small pin flashlight, and it really doesn't do anything. It really makes the darkness heavier, honestly. It's a thin light. As we get up to the top floor, I'm starting to look for the ward numbers, because I know she died in ward N20. I checked on the internet. So that's where they said it happened. But the ward numbers are rubbed off. They're not readable, most of them. So I'm now randomly opening doors. Oh, one other cool thing about the top floor, the entire ceiling is covered in bats. Right? And the bats are swooping us in the light, and we're walking on bat shit. Of all the places I've been in my life searching for that experience, that hauntedness, this was definitely, if something was going to go down, this is the closest I've been to the real deal. Like, this is horror movie material. I'm randomly opening doors. Most of them don't open. The wood has swollen, or there's debris on the other side, but I finally get to a door, and it opens cleanly and easily, and I see the window. It's the only window in the institution like this. I saw it from outside, and I think, this is the room where Margaret Schilling died. We scan with the light. It doesn't even, I'm getting a body memory. It doesn't even take a second. It's unquestionably there. It's not a lie. Etched in the exact center of the room is the form of a human body. It's primarily where the fat melted, as I said. So what that means is from the elbow up, you can see her back, her buttocks. What's interesting about the fat on the back is that her long hair, obviously she laid on top of it, the hair is perfectly etched into the concrete where the fat has seeped through the hair. Up to this point, I sort of imagined Margaret Schilling as like mad and gnashing and pulling her hair and angry, but you know what? The minute we walked into that room, it was the most peaceful, tranquil place in the entire institution. And I was with people, and in that moment I really wished I wasn't, because I wanted to stay here. I wanted to, I'm gonna be honest, I wanted to lay down next to the stain, I wanted to spend the night, and I wanted to feel the room heat up in the day. I don't know, that's just me, right? So I went to the window, I looked out at this beautiful, beautiful view of this mountain town in the moonlight, and it just felt like a really good place to die. And I began to think of Margaret as a very peaceful, beautiful person, although she was mad, and I don't mean to romanticize mental illness, but she obviously let this happen to her. She didn't fight it. Her clothes were perfectly folded next to her, and I think there's a beauty, a poetry about that. We leave way earlier than I want to because everybody else is kind of over it. And they're insufficiently moved, I guess. And I don't really get what I came for, what I'm always looking for. I never get it. I'm looking for blood and horror, and I'm looking for that moment when we were kids where we stopped feeling reason and we stopped being rational, and that's this moment I'm trying to cling to, but I just never get it, and I didn't get it there. And that night, I'm going to sleep in the attic where the visiting artists stay. Professor Catherine Milton has this very nice attic, but it's an attic nonetheless. And I'm laying in a bed, and I put my hands over my heart like Margaret Schilling died, and as I fall asleep, I think about this notion, right, of freezing to death. And I think about how your body's a clock and the way it would just slowly tick down if you were freezing to death. And I let sleep rise, and I just think of it as death, and I do everything I possibly can to put myself in Margaret's mind, and I pass into sleep. And I don't know how long I'm asleep. I don't know how long this takes. But in my dreams, I hear the most wicked, awful, shrill scream you could possibly imagine. And it wakes me up. It's just an auditory dream. There's no image, no visuals. And I wake up, and I have that moment you have when you wake up from a really bad dream when you're like, oh, that's not real. Awesome. That's where my head's at. And for about 10 seconds, I have this feeling of like, finding out where I am, what my place is, and then I hear the same shrill scream in my waking state. My heart starts to beat, I bolt up, and something hits my head. And that's it. That's the moment where I lose reason. Because in that moment, for a split second, I think I brought something back from that horrible, horrible place. And then something jumps on my lap, and I'm about to scream. And I try to get my eyes to adjust, and my heart is beating, and I don't know whether to shut my eyes or to whether like peer into the darkness. And I see something moving, and it's amorphous, and it's black, and it's inky, and it's terrifying. And I adjust, and it is a bat and a cat. The professor's cat, by the way, locked in mortal combat at the foot of my bed to the death. And the bat is screeching. Horrible, horrible screeching. Where I grew up in Texas, we had bats. I never heard a cat kill a bat. This is awful. This is awful. And you know what? It was awesome. This bat lifted up, and the cat would leap up, and it would grab it by its leathery wing and drag it back to the ground, and the bat would screech in pain. And then the cat would chill. And then the rickety, shambled bat would try to crawl away, and then the cat would jump on the bat, and then that screech again. And I sat there for an hour, and I watched that cat playfully kill that bat, because that was it. Of all the times I've done this, that was horror, and that was blood, and it was real. And that's my night in Athens, Ohio. Thanks for having me. This is super, super cool.
Thank you, Josh Dysart.